Alright gang, as I speak I'm surrounded by large piles of boxes that are jam-packed full of things you bought off the wish list for the refugee family arriving in a couple of weeks. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you if you've bought something, thank you if you've donated money, thank you if you have organised a fundraising thing at work or for your neighbourhood or whatever. It's so incredible to see the generosity of people who want to do our bit to welcome a family to Milton Keynes in a couple of weeks. So thank you. If you have been meaning to get around to it and haven't done it yet, now is your time. We would love to kind of have some kind of budget in mind for what we need to spend and what we have to be able to buy the things that we need to get. If you have been meaning to get something from the wish list, go for it quick before you're just left with the big ticket items and it costs you more than you'd anticipated. You can get everything you need on the website and go to this link and you'll be able to get there. We have been following for a couple of weeks this little series on praying. Everybody prays at some point. You'll have seen in the news this week the guy who was surfing and was swept out to sea for over 30 hours. I don't know the guy, I've never met him, I haven't read any of his interviews or anything. I guarantee, whatever the state of his faith life was before he got swept out, I guarantee he prayed at some point. He probably prayed to all the gods he could think of and a whole bunch of others that he just made up. God, if you're there, could you get me back to shore? And we've all prayed a prayer like that. God, if you're there, could you get me this job? Or could you find me this car parking space? Or could you just fix the situation in the hospital so that we get out of here alive? We've all prayed at some point or another. And we want to get better at it because we believe that somehow, we as Jesus people believe that somehow there's some power in it. Karl Barth says that when we clasp the hands in prayer, it's to begin an uprising against the disorder of the world. In other words, that's where we bank it. That's where we bank all of our expectation that this is going to be the thing that could change the stuff that we're involved with. If the disorder in your world is Syria, if the disorder in your world is an internal or a mental or a spiritual or an emotional upset, if the disorder in your world is your family, then the best thing to do, the best weapon to choose if you want to begin an uprising against that disorder is prayer. And so we started with this little thing of, I got no idea how to do it, Jesus, so would you teach me how to pray? That's the exact same question that his disciples asked from him. And then we discovered that he doesn't have this code that he requires from us. We don't have to gain his attention in some outlandish religious way, following some weird practices. We just have to pitch up and ask and begin to speak. And just like Jerry Maguire's Estranged Wife, when you start to speak, you don't have to come with some whole big thing worked out. You don't have to bow in a certain posture in a certain place. You have his full attention.
You had me at hello.
Imagine a continuum. Over here is things that are highly likely. It's almost certain that this will happen. And over here are things that are highly unlikely. There's almost no chance of this happening. Let's say, for instance, how likely is it that you're going to bump into the Queen at the petrol station buying a Scotch egg? Highly likely, not at all likely, not at all likely probably. But we do this kind of mental calculation all the time, every day. How likely is it that if I eat this little bit of chicken that I'm cooking, how likely is it that I'm going to get a salmonella off it? Highly likely at the moment. There's still blood oozing out of it. Okay, I'm going to leave that in the pan for a little while. How likely is it that if I go down this road I'll find a car parking space? Not likely at all. I've never found a car parking space in my life down that road. So I'll go down another one and look for a multi-storey. How likely is it that if I say something to that person at the bar who I like the look of, that they'll throw that drink over me? Highly likely. Okay, then maybe I'll have another drink before I try it anyway. We do this the whole time. How likely is something to happen? And we base it on a whole load of different quick mental calculations that we do. There's this time that this guy goes up to Jesus. The guy is covered in leprosy, this infectious, contagious skin disease which kind of causes his skin to rot and his limbs to begin to drop off, and he's an outcast. He's on the edge of society. He's not allowed into the town. He can't come in through the city gates. He has to stay outside. And he interrupts Jesus walking past one time. And he runs up to him and he says, Lord, if you're willing, if you're able, He's not the only person that begins a conversation with Jesus that way. There's another time there's a guy who brings his son who has all these convulsions and fits the whole time to Jesus. And having kind of argued his way past Jesus' mates, he eventually finds Jesus and says, if you're willing, would you do this? And each time this happens, the Bible says that Jesus has this gut reaction. The word that's used implies that the feeling begins in his gut. It's not just a slight sense of feeling. It's an extreme reaction. It's a gut reaction. Sometimes it's translated as compassion, extreme compassion for this person. Sometimes it's translated as indignation. There's an indignancy in the way Jesus responds to that question of, if you're willing. Because what that person has done has, that they've got a highly likely and unlikely, and they've put themselves somewhere on that continuum. How likely is it that Jesus is going to listen to my prayer? Highly likely? Very unlikely. Maybe a 3 out of 10 on this one. I was pretty bad last week. How likely is it that Jesus will do anything that I ask him to do? Maybe an 8, maybe a 7, maybe a 6. The person who approaches Jesus with a big if, with a sense that they're down this end of the continuum, the highly unlikely. They're certainly nowhere approaching a 5 or a 6 and edging towards likely. They're down here. The person that assumes that Jesus is predisposed towards not listening, not stopping, not paying attention, not granting their requests for some reason, they approach Jesus with a big if hanging over them. They say things like, if you're willing, would you do that? If you're able, would you do that? If you're there, could you get me to land? Could you help my Auntie Mabel in the hospital? If you're there, could you get me this job? If you're willing, Jesus. Then we'll say things like, if you've got enough spare capacity and attention after you've fixed Syria, and by the way, why don't you get on with fixing Syria? And you should probably pay some attention to North Korea. And I know my problems aren't that big, but if you've got any spare capacity, and if you care about the small minutiae of my life, I really don't know which job to take. I really don't know whether to say yes or no to that marriage proposal. I really don't know which colour to paint the downstairs loo. Paint it white. If you are there, if you don't mind paying attention to this small request, if you can forgive me for the stuff that I did last week. We come with these big ifs. If you're a Christian, if you've been hanging around church any time, then we do it in a holy way. We come with these things like, if it's your will, God. And we'll say things like, Lord, would you bring peace in that situation? Would you heal my Auntie Mabel in hospital? If it's your will. If it's your will that you'd rather have war and you'd rather she died in a horrible manner, then that's okay. But if it's your will. And we all have these big ifs that hang over us because for some reason we approach Jesus with a sense that it's highly unlikely that he will listen. Why do you do that? Why do I do that? Well, it's because we think that God is like us. You see, it's not written down or anything, but I have a list of people that I don't really like. People who have said things about me or to me. People who have attitudes that I don't agree with. People who vote differently to me. People who listen to the wrong kind of music, support the wrong team. Extroverts, the whole thing. People that I don't really get on with. And I assume that because I'm not super willing to associate with those people, therefore God must also have a list of people that he's not super willing to associate, and I'm probably on that list. I assume that because I find it difficult to forgive some people have hurt me and I harbour a mistrust of them, a lack of forgiveness towards them, a lack of love in my heart towards them. I assume that because that's true of me, it's also true of God. I assume that God would run things the way I would run them, would react to people the way I would react to them. I assume that if somebody was to hurt me and then apologise, and then hurt me again and then apologise, and then hurt me again and then apologise, I assume at some point my patience would run out. Therefore, I assume it's the same about God, and I begin to believe that I float towards this end. It's highly unlikely that he would ever listen to me. Rowan Williams, who used to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, had a big beard. So clever, I couldn't understand most of what he said. But one time I managed to grasp onto a quote. And he said, God is not simply an overinflated version of how you would be if you were to run the universe. It's not like that. He's different. He's bigger than that. He's other than that. He's holy would be a Bible word for it. His ways are higher than our ways. I can't grasp them. I don't understand them. They don't always make sense to me, but they are different. He isn't like that. So all these guys approach Jesus with an if. If I'm honest, it's how I often approach Jesus. Another time a guy comes up to Jesus. Well, in fact, he doesn't. He's at the side of the road and Jesus is walking past, and he's walking past these two blind guys, and there's a whole entourage and a crowd following Jesus, and these two blind guys are at the side of the road begging, and they yell out, "Jesus, would you come over here and listen to us?" And he does. He interrupts where he's going. He wanders over to where these two blind guys are. He doesn't say this, but I imagine he grabbed them by the hand or put his hand on their shoulder or something so that they knew that he was standing right in front of them. And he says to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" Which is a random question, isn't it? What a bonkers question. Everybody knows the answer to that question. They want their sight back. What do you want me to do for you? It's right there. It's blaringly obvious. Everybody can see it. But I wonder if Jesus doesn't want you to experience the wonder of the question of God stopping everything he's doing, interrupting his journey, looking you in the eye and saying, "What is it that you want?" Blowing past the if, blowing past the buts and the maybes, floating all the way from the highly unlikely to the fully likely that you have my attention now. What is it that you want? "I want to see again," says the guy. Of course he does. And Jesus says, "Okay," and fixes his eyes. Again, this isn't the Bible, this is conjecture, but I wonder if you had the full attention of Jesus every day and he says, "What is it that you want me to do for you?" You might start off with "I need my eyes to work again." But then you might float on towards, "And there's this guy at work who's going through a really tough time right now, could you help him out? There's this country that has just been ravaged by war and there's millions of children right now who are hungry and starving. Lord, could you bring peace to that area? There's a turmoil in my mind and I can't get peace, I can't get understanding, I can't get guidance. God, could you help? Could you make me a person of peace rather than a person of anger?" I wonder if your prayers might not get bigger and bigger and bigger if I was to be able to understand that it is highly likely, a dead cert, that if I ask, I have the full attention of Jesus. So once I get that, the question is, what do I want to say? Lord, teach me to pray.